Well, hello and welcome to another video from the reaction series. I really do hope you're enjoying these videos. My name is Tim Montgomerie, by the way, a member of the reaction team. And if you are enjoying these videos, please do subscribe using the button below on YouTube. That helps us go up the algorithm and more people can see the videos that we are producing. Today, I'm really grateful to be joined by the former Conservative MP, former diplomat, writer, Rory Stewart. I'm just disappointed, sad that the subject that we are discussing is one of really profound gravity. I've asked Rory to come and talk about the situation in Afghanistan, and we're recording this on Friday, a day in which the spokesman for the Afghan government has been killed in Kabul by the Taliban, the border town of Zaranj, if I've got the pronunciation right, the first major town in Afghanistan to fall to the Taliban since 2016. Over the course of the last month, 1,000 Afghans have died in the fighting to save their country, falling once again under Taliban control. Rory, it must be devastating for you, someone who has paid incredibly close attention to Afghanistan and the region, to be witnessing these events.
It is, Tim. It is. And firstly, thank you for having me on. And secondly, apologies if the internet connection from Scotland is slow.
Where are you in Scotland?
I'm in the Scottish Highlands, and
Lovely.
we're a long way down a copper line from the server. And I also have to try to persuade my mother and others not to be using the internet at the same time as me, otherwise we'll find ourselves in trouble.
Well, it's looking good and sounding perfect at the moment. So
thank you. To get back to the serious subject, it is heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. I first saw Afghanistan just at the end of the Taliban period, and I remember going into Kabul. Kabul at that time was a ghost town. There were barely a couple of 100,000 people in the city that now has nearly 5 million people, no cars in the streets, obviously no girls in schools throughout the whole country. And I've seen over 20 years, and I think I've made probably 100 separate trips to Afghanistan over the last 20 years, the enormous changes that have happened. And it's extraordinary. Obviously, there's a whole generation that wasn't born when the Taliban was around. Incredible development of the city, of education, of opportunities. Of course, still a dangerous place, an unstable place over the last 5 years, but nothing like what's happened in the last 2 months. Essentially, President Biden's decision to announce full US withdrawal, taking out even air support, has completely toppled the apple cart. We're now in a situation in which the Taliban that was confined to rural areas of Afghanistan are now in real danger of taking major cities, as you just pointed out.
And because you mentioned how young the population of Afghanistan is, there's a population of about 38 million in total, is that right? And the median age is, I don't think, only about 18, 19, 20. So for the Afghan people, it's not sort of like their country is going back under a rule that they were familiar with and hated. For the majority of the Afghan people, the life and the improvements that you have just described, Rory, is what they know. And so,
absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
These are a people who have enjoyed freedoms, particularly women that they didn't have in a couple of generations ago or generation ago. And so this, in a way, must be as frightening for them as it would be for the British people, the average British person who would not have been familiar with Taliban control at all.
It is terrifying. And suddenly you see these figures from a completely different age re-emerging. So Herat at the moment, which is the big city in Western Afghanistan, is being defended by a warlord called Ismail Khan, who I again knew from 20 years ago when he just escaped from Taliban custody and had a long history of fighting going all the way back to the Soviet occupation in the 1970s. He's now set up his own militia group again and is defending the city of Herat. And he's a man now in his 70s, like a glimpse of this extraordinary past age, all these warlords re-emerging. And so much at odds with what the Afghan government has been trying to do, which is move away from militias, move away from warlords, try to create a central state.
And you rightly mentioned the implications of Biden's quite precipitate withdrawal, and some of the ways that the American forces withdrew, leaving the airport overnight without really even informing the Afghan military. Just sort of, I don't know what the word to describe it is, but it's not the way you treat allies, certainly. But where do we go from now, Rory? Is it the White House that has to take a lead in changing its position and turning this situation around? Is it NATO, of course, who made a commitment to Afghanistan? Is it the neighbors, the neighboring countries in the region? Is it the United Nations? I'm sure the answer is in some part all of these people, as well as, of course, the Afghan military and government itself. But where do we start to begin to turn the tide on this? Because one of the most striking things I find about this debate, I'm mesmerized by it and horrified by it, but the lack of coverage of the issue. We spend 4 or 5 days in the British press talking about taking the knee, which, you know, I'm not saying is an irrelevant controversy, but when things like we withdraw from Afghanistan, when we cut the aid budget, leaving potentially hundreds of thousands of people across the world vulnerable to sickness or hunger, we hardly cover these issues at all. It's incredibly frustrating. Sorry, lots of questions in there, but the first one I pinpointed. Where does progress start?
Yeah.
Is it with public pressure, or is it the White House have got to take a lead, or what?
So the ideal thing would be for President Biden to change his mind and for the US to keep some air support in Afghanistan. Combat operations finished in 2016.
Yeah.
So this isn't a situation which has been very costly to the United States recently. One of the things Biden's been saying in speeches and his aides been saying is, well, how long do you want us to stay? You know, we want to be there 10, 20 years and think of all the American lives that we sacrificed. Well, the truth of the matter is that, in fact, Americans haven't really been actively engaged in combat fighting much in the last 5 years. I think there were 2 soldiers killed in one of the last 2 years and 4 in one of the other years. This is not the days.
And some of those weren't from combat operations at all. I think there were accidents in barracks, and I think one died. Yeah.
Exactly. And in fact, the British military has had years when almost unique in British history, where no soldiers have been killed at all anywhere in the world. Mm. So it is something, providing this air support, providing support which allows the Afghan army to stand up to the Taliban is vital. And it's something Biden could easily do, but I fear it's something he won't do because he's really dug his heels in.
Yeah.
The second question you had was about NATO and other allies. The problem there, which we haven't really discussed much in the British press, and it's a bit awkward, is that what this reveals is that nobody can operate anymore without the United States. We have these enormous defense budgets. You know, Britain is spending over 2% of its GDP on defense, 40 billion pounds or more. But the way that our military is designed is now completely designed to only work as an adjunct to the United States. We spend an incredible amount of money in very expensive kit, aircraft carriers, new frigates, but we are unable to sustain even relatively modest combat operations on our own. The kind of operation you're talking about in Afghanistan, one would have predicted 20, 30 years ago would be well within the capacity of Britain or indeed other NATO allies working together. So it's really interesting because that has implications for everything that we do in the world over the next 30, 40 years. If we're actually simply don't have an independent defense policy, can't conduct an independent defense policy.
And
yeah.
Is that because we're not spending enough money primarily, or spending money in the wrong way, Rory?
Spending money in the wrong way. We are trying to spread ourselves too thin. In particular, we're trying to keep going with a big deep water navy and an independent nuclear deterrent, which is consuming huge amounts of money. And we're cutting back very, very hard on soldiers. Relatively recently, Tim, at the sort of, back in 2005, we were able to maintain 10,000 soldiers in the field in Iraq and easily maintain another brigade in Afghanistan. So now we really struggle to keep 3,000 soldiers in the field anywhere in the world. It's an extraordinary change. And that's happened very, very quickly. And there is no serious discussion about this. One of the, I mean, you talked about the fact that we spent a lot of time talking about other slightly bizarre things. But somewhere at the heart of this conversation about Afghanistan and defense and British foreign policy and British aid is the question of whether Britain is actually serious about its role in the world. And I'm very worried that in many ways we're not, that it's not just that the Foreign Office isn't, that the army isn't set up properly, but the intelligence services aren't set up properly, our development agency isn't set up properly, the Foreign Office isn't set up properly. Because in a sense, I fear we're sort of going through the motions. We make sort of reassuring statements in Parliament, but we're very rarely honest about the limits of our power, and definitely not honest about what we think we could do if we concentrated.
You would, I think, make this region, because of our commitment over the last 20 years, a priority. That's where we should have been.
We should have made it a priority. We should have played a much more active role from the beginning with other NATO partners in making sure that from the beginning we thought in terms of a light, long-term footprint. Our problem in Afghanistan is we went from a massive surge to now total withdrawal. None of those things made sense. What we should have done from the beginning is made sure that the Afghan government was in the lead and provided support behind them, which was affordable and sustainable and which was very long-term.
I want to come back and press you in a moment just about what we may still do, or the world may still do, on Afghanistan. But just because you said what you have, my great concern at the moment is the world will be looking at us in Afghanistan withdrawing, just as we abandoned effectively the Kurds under Trump under the last presidency. Yep. The British cuts to the aid budget all over the world. You know, you and I think, both support 0.7%.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people, 0.7% isn't some magical figure.
Yeah.
You could support 0.5%. You could support 0.4%. But the way we have abandoned projects in the middle of their, operation, clinics, we just sort of pulled the rug from underneath the people we made promises to. Projects are quarter done, half done, 3/4 done, clinics, hunger programs, climate, and the West, for me, with you add up all these things, Afghan, Kurds, is getting a reputation for, you can't be trusted. We really aren't the people that stick around. And I think there will be people in Beijing and Moscow who will be smiling and laughing and scoffing and telling the other governments around the world, we may be a tough relationship for you sometime. We may not seem as nice as the West, but we won't run away.
Yeah, I think that's right, Tim. And definitely Putin exploits that a great deal. In fact, ironically, although he was in Syria on the other side to the Gulf states, the fact that he was prepared to commit on one side or another almost impressed them more than our reluctance to get involved. So it's very sad, but it's also part of a deeper problem in British political life, which is that although, as you say, politics is very interesting, there is a distinct lack of seriousness and responsibility. This is the guiding principle. Right? Theoretically, what should happen is we should have ministers, prime minister, members of parliament who, presented with what you've just pointed out, would say, well, we're not going to behave like that. We're going to reduce, for example, our aid, but we'll do it thoughtfully and sensitively over a couple of years to make sure that we fulfill our obligations to people. That do not immediately jump on a bandwagon, pretend that we have an independent defense posture, and then as soon as the US leaves, effectively blame the US for the decision and take no responsibility ourselves. I mean, these are not signs of a country that's functioning well. And it's worrying because
it isn't just Britain, though. That's the point. And I don't disagree with the word you're saying. It's the West. It's the civilized world, if you like, behaving in an incredibly uncivilized way.
Yes. Interestingly, France is a bit better. France has still got an independent defense posture, was able to operate in Mali in a way without external support. I mean, it was very tough for them, but they were able to do it. And has tended to retain its obligations towards African countries in a way that hasn't been the case with Britain, for example. it's very striking for me when I was Africa minister, going to parts of Francophone Africa and seeing just how deep and enduring that commitment has been, almost from General de Gaulle onwards. How Macron had made, I think, 7 visits to Africa at a time when the British Prime Minister hadn't visited.
Well, we've got a lot of work to do. Just going back to Afghanistan, before I ask you a couple perhaps final questions that are slightly more political nature, back to domestic front, Rory. You don't think Biden's going to change course. I'm afraid you're right about that. When I hear him, this soundbite, America is back, it sticks in my throat, frankly. I don't think he's going to reverse position. For the reasons you stated, NATO is not going to do very much. What can be done next? Who could we look to for action? You know, I think you were a supporter, for example, of punishing Pakistan in some way for their
so there are 2 dimensions to this. The first is we should anticipate huge refugee movements now. I think we don't remember necessarily that after the United States left Vietnam, nearly 3 million Vietnamese left that country over the following years, taken in by the United States, Germany, France, Australia, Canada. And you can expect that out of Afghanistan. And the tragedy is it will be most of the most educated English-speaking people in the country are likely to leave.
As always, yeah.
And we need to prepare for that. I think the second thing is that if there is a solution, the solution lies on regional players getting Pakistan to stop its explicit support for the Taliban and begin providing some kind of support for the Afghan government. At the moment, the Taliban is still able to operate with impunity out of Pakistan. The Taliban leadership has lived in Quetta, in Pakistan, for well over a decade now. And the Pakistan intelligence services very strongly support the Taliban, regardless of what the Pakistan Prime Minister and Army Chief of Staff say. What does a regional solution look like? Well, it means in the end, players like Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, India, deciding that it's in their interest to have an Afghanistan that is not tearing itself to pieces through civil war.
Well, I'm afraid you are completely right in everything you say, but if that is the hope for progress, then I am more despondent, because we've been aware about the problem in Pakistan for a long time, and just nothing seems to be happening on that front either. This conversation is in danger of becoming depressing, Rory, but we are privileged to watch it from afar at the moment. My prayers are just with the people of Afghanistan. You, though, aren't staying in Scotland and the UK. You're going back to the region to roll up your sleeves and try and help with the region situation. I don't know whether you're allowed to talk about it. You've talked about it.
Yes, very happy to talk about it. So I and my family are going to move to Jordan, and we're going to be working in Jordan, primarily focused on working with Syrian refugees and Palestinians and Jordanians, also some Iraqis, and we're working particularly on restoring a Roman site in northern Jordan and working on the extraordinary traditional crafts of Jordan, particularly furniture, woodwork production. And the idea is to create livelihoods, jobs. We think we can create literally thousands of jobs for very vulnerable communities, and find a way of doing it in a way that restores national pride, a sort of positive sense of pride. One of the things that frustrates me sometimes about development when I was the DFID Secretary of State is that development can feel very patronizing. Somewhere at the base of it is a sort of modernization theory where you're sort of implied that what you have to do is make another country more like yourself. The great thing about working, as we often do, with heritage and culture, is that you can show that people can generate incomes in a way that really works the texture they're in society, develops a positive sense of national pride. And that's what we're hoping to do.
Well, I wish you every success. And if I wouldn't be a burden, I would love to come and visit you over there at some point. Visit this project.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
I had the privilege, but also the sadness of visiting the Satari refugee camp, quite the height really of the Syrian civil war, and I would love to go back to that part of the world. And if I could be useful, that would be fascinating, Rory. Rory, moving from the stuff of enormous global significance back to domestic politics. I'm a Conservative, deeply disappointed with where Boris Johnson is taking the party at the moment. Although I think you and I were on different sides of the Brexit debate. I know I had a lot of admiration for your vision of a more humane conservatism, and I was sad that you left the Conservative Party in October 2019, and you then talked about an independent bid for mayoralty of London, and then of course the elections were delayed, and that sort of scuppered that plan for you. But where are you politically at the moment? Your mind is obviously going probably on Jordan and your new life, but do you still see yourself as a Conservative? Do you think of yourself politically homeless? Could you come back in the Conservative Party one day? What's the trajectory?
I mean, this obviously the Conservative Party, it's been a very important part of my life, and I still have deep friendships within the party. I'm very, very troubled by Boris Johnson, and I found that very difficult to see colleagues that I liked, who I thought, like me, would absolutely reject his approach to governing. I mean, I think my fundamental problem with him is I think he lacks seriousness, he lacks responsibility. And I was horrified to see people move so quickly to endorse him. And I think I'm still sort of recovering slightly from that. I still think that the Conservative Party has an enormous amount to offer, but my vision of it was a vision of it that was looking at the best of, I suppose, a more centrist sort of conservatism. I mean, the sort of things that get me out of bed in the morning are trying to work out what we can do with adult social care, how we can keep Scotland in the United Kingdom, how we deal with the issues in Northern Ireland, how we rebuild our Foreign Office and Defence policy. And these are issues which the Conservative Party's always had very distinctive things to say about, and where there are conservative ways of thinking and talking about them, but they're not things that I'm feeling at the moment at the centre of where the Conservative Party is.
Could you one day see yourself, let's put the Conservative Party aside for one moment, but could you see yourself at least coming back into British politics?
Well, I'd love to come back into British public service. I mean, I'm not sure, Tim, to be honest, after 10 years, maybe my conclusion is I'm not an ideal politician. I would love to come back to help a government, any government, do something in public service. I'm just not sure that that would be. My apologies for my clock.
That's an amazing clock.
Incredible clock and the noise. Would love to come back to help a British government, but I'm not sure elected politics is going to be easy for me, because I think I find political parties a bit bruising.
Well, I honestly, we had a few differences personally on Brexit and things, but you were a breath of fresh air in politics, Rory. I'm sorry you're not there. I'm sorry that people like David Gore can't there as well. There's a good number of people that I would have hoped post-Brexit a real healing process might have begun, and people. No, I was supportive of the decision to expel a number of Conservatives when Boris Johnson took that decision, because I felt we were breaching our trust with the people and we had to take tough action. But putting that aside, I hope that once Brexit was done, the family would have been brought back together. And I think that's still a mission that needs to be completed. Whether or not that's begun, let alone completed, but whether or not that happens, I admire what you're going to do in Jordan, but I just wish selfishly for our own country that you will be back one day. Perhaps, as you say, you carefully said public service rather than politics, but I hope it happens, Rory, and just Godspeed as you head towards Jordan. When do you start that chapter?
So end of the year. I'm going back now I'm teaching in an American university.
Yeah, Harvard. Yeah. Good. All right. Well, thank you.
Actually, at Yale, Tim. Sorry,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah. Look, okay. Must get these things right. Well, look, thank you so much, Rory. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We're running a free trial subscription for Reaction at the moment. So if you do go to the main website, leave your email address there. You can have a free month trial, and you can read lots of articles from myself, Ian Martin, Maggie Pagano, and the rest of the Reaction team. But for the time being, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.